typically occupy outposts at Rockport, Tulip, Princeton, and then scouts sent to Benton and Pine Bluff vicinity. They would occupy Benton very temporarily because it was so close to Little Rock. They didn't stay here too long. They usually stayed just across the river because that river gave them a little bit of protection. After this happened, General Steele, who was the Union General in Little Rock, decided to start branching out a little more, even though they were holding close. And on September 2nd, he sent his first one of the scouting expeditions to Benton to try to locate where the Confederates' advanced posts were. He knew they used Benton a lot, so he wanted to see if they were here. When they got to Benton, they weren't here, but just across the river was Colonel Logan and what they call the 11th Arkansas Cavalry, which really it wasn't a regiment. I'll get more into Colonel Logan and the 11th Arkansas Cavalry, but he had about 400 men, and this Confederate scout decided they didn't want to cross the river and tangle with him because they didn't have that many, so they went back to Little Rock. But this is the first time they came out once Steele started feeling more comfortable with his situation. The primary purpose the Confederates were trying to gather up all the foodstuffs, the beef cattle, the wheat, the corn, because they knew if they didn't get it, the Union Army would. And so their purpose was to get everything from the citizens here so it wouldn't fall to the Union. So a lot of people here who these soldiers knew their families, they knew them, they were taking their food, and it was probably a kind of a tough situation to go into your neighbors and take all their cows because you knew if you didn't take them, the Yankees would. So that was the situation. Next slide. Okay, for the Union, they're going to start implementing a campaign of harassment on Confederate camps and outposts and supply points south of the river. Now, General Steele has decided to move from defense to offensive harassment for 4 reasons. First of all, a new general has came into Arkansas to take over. The old general was General Theophilus Holmes. The men called him Old Granny because he just really wasn't too fired up about anything, and they didn't really have much respect for his military tactical ability. They sent General Magruder, who had fought back east with Lee, and General Steele knew that a new commander that's not familiar with the area is going to come in. He's not going to understand the terrain. He's not going to know his officers or what he's actually capable of doing. So Steele knew that was a benefit for him. He also knew they didn't have any cavalry much. That was another positive for the Union. Plus, the infantry were widely scattered. They couldn't support each other very quickly. Because if you walk from Monticello to Camden, that's a pretty good little walk. So if you're able to single them out, that was a benefit for him. And the fourth one, they were worried about Pine Bluff. Because if Pine Bluff fell, Little Rock, Louisville, which is now Morrilton, Dardanelle, Fort Smith, they were going to be cut off from river traffic. So they wanted to make sure they held Pine Bluff. And that was the strategic position in the fall of 1864. Okay, here's another map again, same map I showed a while ago. So if you want to talk about no man's land, here's Little Rock, here's the Arkansas River. Pretty much anything along these roads had been scoured by both armies. The Federals, the Union, they would come out towards Pine Bluff, and of course, if you lived along this area, the Army was going to get your stuff, one way or the other. They came to Benton quite often, so anywhere in this area would have been considered what they talked about no man's land. It's neither side controlled, but both of them occupied at any time. Next slide. Okay, most people don't know there was a first skirmish at Hurricane Creek. We got the marker, but there was actually one that happened about 13 days prior to that battle. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. It all came as a result of a scout sent out by General Steele, led by Captain Charles Coleman, who was commanding about 230 troopers of the 9th Kansas and the 3rd Arkansas Cavalry. The Confederate forces would be led by Colonel John Logan, and he would have mostly his men at this particular battle of the 11th Arkansas Cavalry and Poe's Battalion of Cavalry. And those two units, there's not a whole lot of information on them, and there's a lot of confusion based on the fact that all these men were in the 11th Arkansas Infantry, Poe, Logan, so when they formed the cavalry, they just called it the 11th Arkansas Cavalry. A lot of men listed on Poe's roster are also listed on the 11th Arkansas Cavalry, so they're probably the same unit, and Colonel Logan was just like a brigade commander or commanded a larger contingent of other forces. But those are the forces. Coleman's objective was to locate the Confederates, just like the last scout, but also make note of where any beef, corn, wheat, any households that they could see corn stored in the corn cribs or see cattle on the way, because that was the plan, was send a bigger force and gather all that up. What happened, first of all, he left out on October the 8th, headed south. The skirmish wouldn't be fought till the 10th. So he made it to Benton on the 8th, and he bypassed Benton to the east and managed to get south, and they had a little skirmish there, which he claims he killed 2 Confederates and captured 8. Next slide. This kind of shows the route, best I can, coming down out of Little Rock. He somewhere in here, I don't know if there was probably a little lane or a trail, they got off the military road and came south of Benton. Next slide, please. And they had a little altercation there just south of Benton. And I think this pretty much, if you look at it, follows the old pretty much track of Highway 35 today in that general vicinity. So they had the skirmish, the Confederates, it wasn't a very big group. They retreated, and Coleman he decided he's going to come down as far as Whitman's Mill, which is in this vicinity right here. Whitman's Mill, I'll talk about it a little bit more in detail as well a little bit later. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, he proceeded to Whitman's Mill, and he attacked the Confederates that he found there that were grinding corn. This was an old grist mill, or previously a grist mill. The next day, they stayed there rounding up horses and harness, things that they could use. And during the time frame, these Confederates they attacked, they got reinforcements, and about 100 men, he estimated, attacked him there at Whitman's Mill, and they were able to drive them away, and claims that he killed 6 Confederates and wounded 4, and he had 1 killed and 1 wounded. Next slide. After grinding corn on the 10th of October, he decides to beat fast withdrawal back to Little Rock, because they know he's there now. He probably went back, and this will be the old Camden Trail. There's the crossing at Hurricane Creek back to Little Rock. Next slide. He had stopped at Hurricane Creek to water the horses, and what happened was when he got his men back on the road, Colonel Logan had got in front of him and cut him off from Little Rock, so they had to fight through the Confederates. And this was the first skirmish at Hurricane Creek on October 10th, resulting in 2 Confederates killed and 2 Union wounded. Next slide. Over here on the Saline River, this back in the 1860s was known as Fagan's Ford, because General Fagan owned the land. And Logan, in this particular episode, was in that vicinity, and he moved across country, and of course, probably, I'm just speculating because I don't know for sure, but there was probably a road in the vicinity of what's now Alcoa Road going out of town here that would wind up Wilkerson Road that crosses Hurricane Creek down below Bryant. There's probably a lane, and that's how Logan proceeded to get in front of the Union forces as they moved up here. Now, this crossing was called Hunter's Crossing. Reverend Andrew Hunter had a home and a farm there, so it was most locally known as Hunter's Crossing. That's where the battle took place, and that's how Logan got in front of him. He used a little known bypass road to get in front of him. Next slide. Okay, General Steele's feeling pretty good now. He knows that Price is getting whipped pretty bad up in Missouri, so he knows they're not going to be able to come back very quickly and help out. He also knows the Union armies are winning a lot of victories back east, so he decides he's going to be a little more bold and kind of go deeper into territory. And so he has a second expedition he's going to come out of Little Rock with, and he had 3 primary goals. He wanted to strip the country between the Arkansas River and that area of any forage, foodstuffs that were available. Second, he wanted to pinpoint all the Confederate locations, and then he decided Princeton would be the logical place because that was where he knew there was a concentration of the cavalry. Monticello, he had recently learned that the infantry had moved towards Camden and Arkadelphia, so he wasn't too worried about anybody coming in from Monticello, Pine Bluff area. So that was his goal. Those were his goals. Next slide. This is a map that David DeMuth put together when he did his article for the Historical Quarterly on this battle, and it shows everything a little bit better than the original maps I showed you. But you can see Pine Bluff, Monticello, Warren, Camden, Arkadelphia, of course, Old Washington's over here. And this is the route. It shows the route the Union troops took. Mount Elbow was another major crossing coming out of Pine Bluff, just to kind of orient you to where we're talking about. Okay, next slide. Okay, the Union forces will be led by Major George Avery. Couldn't find out much about him. He was the commander of the 3rd Missouri Cavalry, but his forces would be 470 troopers from these 4 units. Key thing to know here, the 4th Arkansas Cavalry had a company of Union soldiers that were from Saline County under command of Enoch Vance. He was from the Sheridan area now, but a lot of folks who either didn't secede or didn't join Confederate units joined him, or he also had a few who had served a little while in the Confederate Army and decided they wanted to switch sides. But that's kind of a unique thing here that they're actually going to be taking part in this. Next slide. Okay, the Confederate forces, once again, would be commanded by Colonel John Logan, the 11th Arkansas Cavalry, Post Battalion, and the Texas Regiment, Chisholm 2nd Texas Partisan Rangers. And he would have approximately 400 troops. Next slide. Okay, like always, the Union troops would come out of Little Rock, headed towards Benton, and they had the same method of operation when they get close to Benton. They'd get about 2 miles out of town, probably, I don't know where that would be now, but they would always send a detachment ahead, and they would come down the old military road, and when they got up here close probably to Kentucky Fried Chicken Hill, they would ride as fast as they could into town, circle the main streets, and try to cut off escape out of town going to the south. And they did this over and over. Every time they came to Benton, that's the way they approached Benton. When they did this, they captured a couple of men from Logan's bunch, and I've actually been able to pinpoint one of the men was named Anderson P. Vinson. He was a Saline County native, and he was probably visiting somebody here, and he just didn't move quick enough. But that's how they operated at Benton. Once they got done at Benton, they didn't find anybody else. He decided to camp there for the night, and rather than move on down the main road to Jenkins Ferry, he decided to take the road that goes right down the river. Back in those days, the Arkansas River, the Saline, they had a roadway or a little trail on either side of the river because you couldn't always ford it. There was always a pathway. So he took the pathway down the river. He probably came down the road a little ways in the river here. He crossed at Pratt's Ferry, which is this road here is probably coming out of Pine Bluff that goes through Sheridan now and on to Malvern. Pratt's Ferry was somewhere in this vicinity on the Saline River, just upstream from Jenkins Ferry. So he was going to go across Pratt's Ferry to head on down towards Princeton. When he would get down close to Tula, here's where he would start having his first, I guess the Confederates would meet up with them, and it would be under Major Poe's battalion. Next slide. This is a picture of Major James T. Poe. He was a Saline Countyan. When the war started, he resigned as Saline County judge and went and joined the 11th Arkansas Infantry. He was a lieutenant and a captain in Company A of the 11th Arkansas. Then he was elected to be major before they went off to Memphis. Became one of the primary field officers. He would be the one officer in the 11th Arkansas that the men actually had some respect for because he tried to do right and get them trained, whereas the colonel and lieutenant colonel, they always felt like they kind of left them hanging. So he stayed with them. His farm was down kind of towards Pratt's Ferry. He was from what is now Grant County. But he went through the battles of Island Number 10 with the 11th Arkansas. He was captured with them. He spent from April through August of 1862 in prison camp on Johnson's Island up in the Great Lakes. He was released. They came back to Vicksburg. They reorganized the regiment. He was elected major again, and he continued to serve with them in the vicinity of